Good afternoon. The topic of my presentation, Silk Road and the diffusion of Chinese culture in Russia. Part of my presentation is at variance with some of the other presentations. Myself and my colleagues and other specialists do understand that one should give a lot of importance as to how build the Silk Road the right way. We all know that the Silk Road in the past connected many cultures, but the goods from China through the Silk Road were getting into Russia, into villages and towns. And this goes back to the 10th century. In the 13th century, when the Mongol cavalry was from Yellow Sea coast to the Danube River, there are many documents showing that the trade network was in place on the continent, which contributed to the development of trade between the Kama and Volga River.
与当地的居民也还有与这个来自于欧洲的汉萨同盟的贸易商互相进行易货贸易。当时的伏尔加河畔的尼日利诺夫格勒特，因此成为欧洲贸易的枢纽之一。在这座城市呢，至今还有一个被称作西安的地方。 同时呢，我也是因为在一次偶然的机会，在阅读这个有关俄罗斯人的这个姓氏来源的时候，
also historical evidence showing that already in the 16th century, among many social groups of Russia, there were last names and first names that show that Chinese culture had already penetrated deep into Russian lives. Ambassador to Lithuania was Vasily China, Vasily Kitai.
比方说，在1475年的时候，
There was one Chinese
派往立陶宛的使臣
resident in Tver, and his name was Kitai Ivanovich Yepyshev. In 1555, there was one landowner whose name was Kitayets, Chinese. Thus, we can see evidence of penetration of Chinese culture into Russian life.
Everybody knows that trade between China and countries of Central Asia was an important economic factor that promoted growth. The Silk Road was a central link of this web of trade. And, of course, this web has a long history that dates for two millennia. And the contacts between Russia and China by merchants migrating for acquisition of goods. We had transborder trade when borders were not existing. Penetration of Chinese goods to Russian cities was done on a large scale. Among such cities, we can call Astrakhan in the lower range of Volga. And then they would migrate north and would migrate to Nizhny Novgorod. And merchants bringing goods from China would export from Russia furs, honey, wax, and Ivan IV has met with envoys of Bukhara, Samarkand, and among them were trade treaties signed. In 16th and 17th century, the trade web expanded. The trade relations between China and Russia and Astrakhan and Kazan regions were built on cross-country trade. Russian expansion to the east, to Siberia, to Yenisei, gave a new impetus to the emergence of new forms of trade. Saratov, Nizhny Novgorod, Astrakhan on the Volga, Tobolsk on the Irtysh River became the major centers for the major nodes for trade communication. Speaking about economic development, I can say that the goods that were transferred between the two countries, they brought new technologies, new fashions, and trade promoted also the development of culture, the development of new traditions. And in 19th century, Russia has established official diplomatic relations with Chinese Empire. And since then, trade routes and nomads that lived on these trade routes have become a driving motor of the growth potential for the Silk Road. From mid-17th century, Russia had set up more close links, including the diplomatic representations, exchange of embassies, and the special fact mission of Ivan Tsetlin has been set up after crossing Mongolian steppes. He went to Kyoto in China, and finally he ended to Changzhou, the Chinese city, which he reached in September 1618, when they arrived at Beijing. There were other missions by Baikov, Stachel, that one after another went to China and learned about Chinese culture, history, traditions, economy, trade potential. Such missions help not only establish new routes, that they did not only give new information about the trade and the lifestyles of the Chinese people, but also got information about the philosophy and culture of Chinese civilization. It helped us to understand the ceremonial traditions Chinese used in their communication with foreigners. In 17th and 18th centuries, the impact of Europe has become more manifest in China. Europe rushed to China, and this also had an impact on Russia. The Enlightenment movement in Russia, which combined Russian interest with the West, also got a new impetus by acquainting ourselves with Chinese culture. The Chinese rush of the 17th century in France led to emergence of new fashions that were called chinoiserie. It became an imperial fashion in 16th century. The Catholic priests, missionaries, has penetrated China. The European travelers, missionaries, religious priests wrote their notes. In 1585, the first description of culture of China has been published, which was a sort of a bomb broken in European cultural space. At that time, the enlightened people of Russia were also trying to obtain knowledge and get the information that was available in Europe to better understand our distant neighbor, and at the same time, because at that time there was no major information about China available. But von Wiesen, Novikov, and other writers of the 17th and 18th century have in their writings many interesting remarks about Chinese culture, which interested them very much. In 1676, von Wiesen had printed philosophical remarks where he spoke about Chinese attitudes and quoting the Chinese traditions, and he wrote about notes about despotism, trying to analyze the phenomenon of imperial rule. In the time of Eugene, Kyaklin Treaty has been signed between Russia and China, which brought these countries closer to each other and set up a new level until to 1917 from Russia to China. 18 missions, Orthodox priests, has been sent to China. There were more than 200 priests that set up their parishes, built up churches in China, and made this Orthodox missionary work. We have to mention their reverence of translation of Chinese books and knowledge about Chinese history, politics and culture, about Chinese beliefs and Chinese traditions. Thus, these religious missions promoted the first sinological school that had been set in Russia, and then became famous with its interesting analytical work about our neighboring civilization. If you speak about one of these writers, whose name was Bichurin, he made an unmeasurable contribution to the study of Silk Road. We can see that apart from Bichurin, there were a number of other visitors who came and showed interest in the study of China culture. They also made the first Chinese-Russian dictionaries. They opened schools where Chinese could be taught. The Mandarin language has been studied. And also Russians were interested in the study of the national minorities in the area of Chinese imperial domination. Bichurin and other assistants of him, other missionaries, made a major enlightening work in various rural and distant hinterland areas of China. It is worth mentioning about the events that happened in 1720. One of the missions to China that was sent at that time went to China through Mongolia, and on the way to China they made a study of Mongol culture, Mongol language and history, traditions of Mongolian nomadic life. So, moving eastwards, the study of the cultures and nations living on the Silk Road route became very prominent. It shouldn't be underestimated. Apart from several studies of Bichurin, we can also mention the works that related to the study of Chinese language and the study of Chinese hieroglyphics. And Bichurin also made interesting studies looking into Xinjiang province population, different ethnic groups in Xinjiang. People who lived beyond the Chinese Empire, people of Central Asia, came also in the focus of this ethnographer. Central Asiatic studies of Bichurin on a wide range of issues that he could encounter in his travel made a gem contribution to the European culture and Russian science. When we come to the 19th century, and speak about West moving into China, speak about Orthodox missions in China coming from Russia, we can see that this was a very interesting cross-cultural process of enculturation. Leo Tolstoy and Alexander Pushkin were very much interested in Chinese. In 1802, when Bichurin has come with an Orthodox mission went to Beijing, Pushkin, the great Russian poet, was a friend of Bichurin, and he tried to understand China deeper. Pushkin has read about 82 books that were in Bichurin Library. He read everything that was written about China in Europe, and also he has left several notes about China. When Pushkin was told by Bichurin about an important book of the Chinese people, the Sanzizin, three-word book, in one of the versions of Eugen Onegin that Pushkin was writing at that time, he mentioned the three-word book. So, Pushkin thought that Sanzizin book is a sort of brief encyclopedia for the education of the young. So, the poet was really interested in the study of Chinese heritage. Coming to Leo Tolstoy, who made a big contribution to the development of Soviet and Russian thought. Leo Tolstoy was acquainted not only with the works of Lao Tzu and Confucius, but also knew the work of Menzi in his search for moral values. Coming back to Bichurin, we know that they wrote a lot extensively on Chinese traditions, their mental structures, their mentality, their traditions, and their habits. In since 1884, Tolstoy started to translate the book of Lao Tzu into Russian. He spent 10 years in order to translate and publish his translation of Lao Tzu. Tolstoy wrote about this. My interest in Lao Tzu has been very profound, and this translation helped him to understand how Confucius was thinking and what was his theory. Tolstoy had admired the heritage of Confucius, saying that it is unparalleled in the West. These books of Chinese philosophical and social thought made a great impact on Tolstoy. Now the Jin and Lao Tzu works formed his new views, and in the library of Tolstoy we can have a look at these books. The books like on the works of Confucius, these notes help us to understand how important was Chinese philosophy for Russian culture and how it had an impact on such a great thinker like Leo Tolstoy. Yesterday in the morning, in the papers that were presented in the first session, I have heard a lot about how broad were connections of Tolstoy and other thinkers. This proves that his attention towards China and Chinese literature was not accidental. It gives a high evaluation of our dialogical encounter. Summing up what I had been relaying chronologically, we can assume that the culture on the Silk Road Way managed to bring forward many of the people from different walks of life. It was not only the goods that were exchanged, but also ideas, cultural and aesthetic attitudes, and all that enriched our common cultural links. If we speak about the modern condition of reshaping the Silk Way today, I have a personal opinion that it would be very important to promote mental paradigms, cultural exchange, mutual understanding, major tourist attractions that could enable us to reflect on how to interact with the people of the Silkway region in order to set up a major project and implement it in a proper way. Thank you for your attention.
谢谢大家，Спасибо за внимание.